As the solar capability scheme only kicked off in May this year, and it mostly is for buildings which are in the planning stage, therefore not yet built, there are very few actual project references, but one of them is in the bottom left. For the time being, it claims the record as Singapore's largest residential PV system, and it's all of 16 kilowatts. We've also got the first zero-energy building, so pulling the rug out a little bit, but you'll see the first commercial one, and I think a lot more complex. It generates, with an 8.5 kilowatt system on the roof, about 800 to 900 kilowatt hours a month, which exceeds the average consumption, and that's because we've taken the big steps in this household of conserving a lot of energy. The house consumes roughly 1/3 of the national average for the house of its category. And the line at the bottom, not yet commercially viable at today's costs. That's what we want to see if we can do something about in the future, so I don't see everybody adopting this kind of approach yet. That shows you some of the problems that one has with renewable energy. It's intermittency. The daily energy yield depends on the sunshine. That goes up and it goes down. The black line across the top there is the average of what's been produced to date from the 4th of June until practically yesterday. So roughly nearly 35 kilowatt hours a day. And that brings us to the other side of it, that because renewable energy and sunshine doesn't match demand, it's intermittent, it's through the daytime, at night time you don't have sunshine, we need storage technology, or we need other power supplies to complement it. So we're not claiming, as Stefan mentioned, that renewable energy will be the answer to everything, but it can go a long way towards it. So we need some kind of on-demand support or fuel. This one I just picked up today, this morning, on the internet. Some communities are going further. Colorado is planning a zero-energy neighborhood. I'm sure they chose the word neighborhood instead of community because the abbreviation is ZEN, which is very nice. I don't know how far they've advanced, but you can look up discovergeos.com and find out details about that. They claim on it that they're ready to move in late next year. I have my doubts, but it'll be an interesting approach to see if that works. Now, can this be applied to Singapore? That was pretty much the next question. And this is a controversial slide. I produced it quite a few years ago. It's an estimate using Google Earth and some planning details that roughly there are 100 square kilometers of roof space and some usable facade space in Singapore. If we could cover all that with PV going forward into the future, it would represent roughly 10 gigawatts of capacity, which would generate about 30% of Singapore's electricity at the rate we consumed it last year. Now, it's a big if. There are several doubts there. I would appeal to perhaps BCA and URA to come out with the facts, because those guys know what the roof space is. It's the same as the footprint of all the buildings in the country. They tell us lots of GFA figures, which aren't interesting for this. Roof space is what counts. Then we could argue over that 60, 100, or 120 square kilometers. But going forwards, I think it will be. The other problem is, though, that would exhaust pretty much the potential of solar power in Singapore. So what are we doing about the other 70%? And the fact that growth in roof space lags behind electricity consumption. Looking at electricity consumption, it's more than doubled since 1986 on a per capita basis. It's interesting to see the last 3 points there, 2005, 2006, 2007, appearing to level off. We're tempted to believe that that might be because of increasing energy prices. I doubt it, but these are figures all put together as everybody, industry and education and private use, all divided by the number of citizens on the island. One thing I suspect there is figures from EDB showing the decline in manufacturing as a component of our GDP. It used to be about 28%, it's now around 25%. And that could mean that we're using less electricity in the manufacturing sector, which is about half of our electricity consumption. That might be one of the things that's contributed to the flattening off. Be that as it may, we are consuming more and more, and we are very resistant to rising energy prices. You've seen that chart before from Tian Chong, the same figures. Industry consumes about half our electricity, buildings consume the other half. Transport obviously is very little on electricity. This is an interesting chart because it shows petrol prices around the world, and it's illustrating several points. One, I've highlighted Singapore and Los Angeles. Americans are now really complaining about the price of gas, as they call it, to fill up their tanks. But they are only now putting up with or facing prices which Europeans have happily absorbed for years. Europeans in Oslo and Paris are now converted this to Singapore dollars, paying $3.50 per litre, and in Los Angeles they're crying over $1.50. What this means, I suspect, is that after they've got over the shock of it, they'll probably continue to consume as before, because in Europe you see lots of big fat cars driving around. As long as the economy is doing well, people consume. So the fuel price hasn't yet been a real constraint. The other one is, if you look at the London chart, 81.5% of the price you pay for fueling a tank in London is tax. And I suspect that means that the non-tax portion is pretty similar around the world, and you can subtract that in your head how much we're paying in Singapore. So tax is much more of a factor than OPEC in what you pay for petrol. Now, there are kind of two sorts of people complaining about the transportation. We could frivolously dismiss the ones who've overestimated the car they need and are now feeling the pinch. If it gets too tough, they can always sell the car and downsize. But a much more serious problem is people who have been used to and have relied on relatively cheap fuel for their lifestyle. Let's say they couldn't afford the rents in San Francisco, and so they're living out in Modesto, God knows where, a 4-hour drive some of these people have a commute. They're in real trouble because this sudden shift in costs is really putting them at a horrible disadvantage, and it's not because they went out of their way to buy a big car or to be energy guzzlers. Now, not all jobs are telecommutable, so we're looking at, if prices like this continue to rise, fundamental changes in the way we live and work and spread ourselves out in the world that we need to go through to fix the problem. And, I don't know the right slide, but yes, okay, Singapore actually has a good chance to make headway there. There are very few people in Singapore who really need to commute more than an hour to get to the office, to get to work. So we don't face the problem that people do living in California, for example. And if you look at what URA is doing now, of moving out some of the government offices out from the CBD, out to more of the so-called cities around the city-state, so that taking the HDB concept a little bit further forward, where we now no longer live and have food and transport and schools and everything in walking distance of where we are, but also perhaps work, then we see the possibility of getting around the traffic problem. Then BCA and NEA are doing their stuff on encouraging more energy efficient buildings. NEA is giving us the information we need to make the right decisions in purchasing air conditioning units or refrigerators, the more efficient ones. And EMA, sorry, over there, David, EMA has recently allowed renewable energy owners to feed electricity into the grid. So it's positive stuff. Can Singapore take on a leading role in renewable energy and in manufacturing in particular? I think it's remarkable to see the speed of policy development. I've been here in this industry since the end of 1996, and the first decade was pretty grim. We didn't face much support. We mostly sold our panels around the region, anywhere but Singapore. So only token efforts are being made as recently as 2004 to attract manufacturing and R&D here. But since a year ago, clear signals of strategic intent from the government, top level down, and renewable energy in particular, renewable energy in general, and PV in particular, have been identified as a core sector, like semiconductors, like telecoms. We've seen $350 million aimed at clean energy. The Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore formed recently, and it's had effect. R&D and manufacturing companies have been attracted here. We've heard of Vestas, they're doing wind R&D. REC, who could have missed that in the papers, was one of the world's biggest manufacturing plants. Norsun, Oerlikon's a Swiss company that will manufacture equipment to make modules. Applied Materials is doing likewise from the US. A German company, Solarfabrik, is manufacturing here cells. EcoSolar came from India, they're manufacturing modules. And Sunseap is a local company, been here a long time, now going to go into thin film manufacturing. EMA and BCA have both published handbooks, so we're really going towards not just manufacturing, but trying to make Singapore a hub. We've seen testbed projects, Marina Barrage and so on, and most recently and happily the Solar Capability Scheme, which is actually generating business for companies like ours. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to hand over to Christophe.